Today's topic is healing. It is one of the foremost topics of discussion and explanation in the modern age. The word cure is gradually being replaced by the word healing in the modern age. The difference being the difference in the concept and the process itself. For example, when we take medical science from the point of view of disease and its cure, then we are inclined to use the word cure. But if we take the medical science from the point of view of health and not disease, and then rectification, then we are inclined to use the word healing. That's all. It is the formation of the basic concept that makes the difference. And in the modern age, almost up to now, the medical science includes a science of disease and its cure more than the science of health and its maintenance. Yes, we have to accept. That is, we have a rather negative approach than a positive approach towards the medical science. I think that requires little bit of rectification. And since the age is a scientific age and an age of growing scientific awareness, I think the word healing is gradually replacing the word cure. For the simple reason that the word healing is more positive in its concept and approach than the word cure. An attempt to cure the disease is basically different from an attempt to rectify the constitution and re-establish the health. Health must be the ideal and not the disease. The cure of disease should not be the ideal. In fact, health must be the ideal, and a distortion from health should be understood as a disease which has no existence of its own. And a rectification and re-establishment of health should be the ideal. I think it is this spirit that is making us use the word healing more than the word cure. Another aspect I want to bring to your notice is that the medicine we use to cure the diseases plays only a minor role in the process of healing. And when we take the viewpoint of the Tibetan master, that is Jwalko, it's only 20% that the medicine has its role in the process of cure, and the remaining 80% is based upon the other factors. For example, rectifying our behavior and our habits with food, drink, sleep, rest, work and sex. This includes a major portion of the process of healing, and the application of medicine and the role of medicine in cure plays only a 20%. These are the two factors which are to be remembered when we consider the process of healing from the modern point of view. Of course, the word healing is predominantly used in a spiritual sense by many people, rather in a religious sense also. It should be used in a more comprehensive way. The medical science and its application should also be part of healing. The use of solar energy, the use of sound, the use of color, the use of a thought, and the use of the presence of the healer. All these things put together form the process of healing, and medicine also is included as one of the items. That is how we should understand the whole subject. And until very recently, healing was considered as a miracle and something which cannot be explained, and something which happens in spite of the ignorance of the healer and the healed. Many times, the process of invocations or mantras are being used in many countries and many nations, and the average healer through sound or mantra uses the process without his own knowledge of the modus operandi. How it takes place, he is not concerned, but he uses and it works. Just as we use the electricity, though we do not know how to produce it. It is but natural. And in India, till today, the power of thought and the power of sound are being used in a miraculous way in cobra bites, and in case of insect bites like scorpions, etc. And we find instantaneous miraculous cures. And the healer does not know how he heals in many cases. But a type of magnetization by the name of initiation is given to the healer. And from that day onwards, he begins to heal and he heals. And he is successful, not 100%, but a little bit higher percentage than the success of medicine. Because medicine also has its own cases of failure, and every science has its own failures. It depends upon the person who uses it and his degree of understanding and mastery. If we compare the success through medicine with the success through mantra healing in case of insect poisoning and cobra poisoning, and sometimes some acute diseases, for example, jaundice, certain types of jaundice, and psychological diseases, sudden fright, etc., and some type of fevers. Such cases are miraculously cured by a healer who is not able to explain how it occurs, but who is confident that he can do it and he does it. This is a statistical truth which occurs in many countries and many nations. And a systematization and a way of formulation has been attempted about the process during the past 1 century, and as a result of which there is much literature on healing. We find in the market thousands of books on healing. Of course, there is something superfluous always when a subject begins to come to prominence. I don't claim that all the literature on healing is scientific, just as all the books in the medical science are not scientific. Always in every subject, there is literature produced for money making and market, and literature produced for self glorification and aggrandizement, and produced as a product of glamour. All these things will be there in every case, in every situation. And we should be discreet in such matters, and we should use our discrimination. The only proof being not the recognition by anybody or any organization, but we should always base on the simplicity of its truth and the tenability, the practicality of the procedure, and the infallibility of the result. So, when we do not lose our common sense in choosing, we have some very good books on the science of healing and the art of healing. Healing is also a science while learning and an art while applying. It is just like the medical science. All medical practitioners cannot be doctors. Practitioners can be made, but doctors are born. Similarly, a healer also. Healers cannot be made. Healers are born. But healing is a science which can be learned by everyone if he has a purity of motive and continuity of purpose. This is the scope of the subject. And the advent of the wonderful book, Esoteric Healing by Alice Bailey, or the theory of the Tibetan Master Jalpur, given to the world through Alice Bailey, that stands unique, and according to my understanding, it is the textbook for the science of healing and the art of healing for the next century, 1 century to come. It caters the needs, and it stands to test, and it stands as a challenge of the power of understanding and discrimination of the student. It is a book which aids us for decades, and repeated reading reveals always a new dimension. That is how the book is composed. The first reading, of course, gives us only a conventional way of understanding. We come to understand that it is something tough. The book has something very difficult to be understood. There are certain points that are vulnerable to reason, and some other points that are mysterious and mystical. That is the impression we get when we read the book for the first time. However leisurely we may go through. But as we begin to observe the patients and begin to apply the principles which we have understood or half understood, then begin to make a second reading, we will understand that we have to read it for a third time. Then a second reading reveals us something more of the practicality and the practical application of the book. And then after about 6 months or 1 year, if we begin to read the book once again, we will understand that we skipped off much of the subject, and we could capture only about 4 or 5% of what the author wanted to convey. So, we should live with the author through the book for at least 2 decades before we can have a rough understanding of the scope of the subject. Of course, there may be people wiser, but this is my own understanding of it. Also, it's not too much to speak if I say that when once we begin to understand this book, we will be able to have a correct estimate of other books on the subject. And then a proper utilization of the other textbooks on the science. So, the indiscriminate way of application will go away from us, and we are scanned, and our intellect is regularized into the subject. That is how the book is composed. And now, let us go into the subject and the application aspect of it. People heal because of the magnetism they have. This is one aspect. At the same time, a healer is not expected to deny the use of medicine. Because if a healer says, you should apply no medicine, you should use only healing, it is as good as the doctor claiming that the science of cure is exclusive of the doctors and medicine, and healing process is unscientific. Both are orthodox in their own way, but they should open the gates and come out and meet. They should have a meeting point. The orthodoxy of the two fellows should be relaxed, and they should shake their hands and try to understand each other. In cases where medicine is required, spiritual healing can help the medicine acting better and within a short time. But where medicine is inevitable, exclusively spiritual healing won't help. That should not be done. Because every branch of healing has its own scope and its own limitations. We should not blame too much about anything. We should understand the limitations of our subject, and we should know the way of supplementation to make the grand total as a self-sufficient whole. For example, if we take the clinical approach of understanding a disease, this is diagnosis, taking the results of clinical test, diagnosing a disease, naming it, and trying to antidote it with medicine. That is one approach. Call it the allopathic approach. And then trying to understand the human constitution and not the disease is another approach which should never be denied. The allopathic approach is trying to understand the disease. Another approach is trying to understand the human constitution, its natural state, and the deviation from the natural state. This is what is called the homeopathic way of understanding. In the first case, what is required is a good knowledge of anatomy, physiology, and pathology. In the second case, something more is required. For example, you should understand the physical body as an aggregate of matter where the reversible reactions of biochemistry are taking place. And the chemical action that is taking place in the constitution by way of metabolism and catabolism, it's not physical and it's not matter. The change that is taking place in matter is not material, and there should be a force which is called vital force, which is galvanizing the matter of the body and which is moving the parts of the body. If we are lifting up something, it is not matter that is helping us, but it is force that is helping the matter. And here, our knowledge of anatomy and physiology is not enough. Another dimension is there. That is what is called force. The yogic science calls it pulsation, and in Sanskrit it is called prana. And then due to the functioning of this prana, the physical body after death is getting itself decomposed into the chemicals that are to be returned to the earth in the form of inorganic substances. Again, whenever there is a fertilization or a germination of the seed, the same substances are called forth from nature, from the earth, and again they are being synthesized and used to form the organic substances. So, an analysis and a synthesis is taking place in alternating succession. Whenever there is a death, there is the analysis of the biochemistry into the inorganic substances, and a restitution of the substances, that is a returning, is being conducted. Whenever there is a birth, a borrowing, just as the industrialist borrows money from the bank and makes an industry hypothecated to bank. So this reversible reaction, which the spiritual astrologer and the esoterist calls the phenomenon of the zodiacal sign Cancer in nature. It is the sign of the reversible reactions that are occurring in every living organism. In the advanced organism, they are occurring in the form of the inhalation and the exhalation put together, forming the respiration. So this is what is called the sign Cancer, which represents the respiration and its apparatus. So you have to superimpose your knowledge of the vital force upon what you already know, that is the anatomy and the physiology. And then the whole process requires an intelligence, because it is not working at random. There seems to be a plan, a programming more efficient than the programming of a computer. Because a computer, however sophisticated and modern it may be, requires a person to feed it properly. And if your feeding were to be defective, the computer gives you defective results. It has no intelligence. But here, there is an intelligence also involved along with the force, which can be called mind and its layers. So, the homeopathic approach gives you an understanding of the human constitution as a threefold capsule, a unit of matter, force and consciousness. And here, the concept of health is a little bit different from the concept of the first. The causes that maintain the constitution exist in the intelligence and the vital force and not the matter of the body. So, any disturbance that takes place in the higher planes, that is the mind and the force, is bound to have a manifestation of its results on the physical plane. So, homeopathy teaches us that disease never exists on the physical plane. Always disease exists in the mental and the vital plane, and the results of disease are manifest on the physical plane. And the process of re-establishing health should take place in the mental and vital planes, whereas the results of health will be once again enjoyed on the physical plane. And that doesn't mean that the theory of allopathy is incorrect. But this means the two theories require a mutual supplementation before we can understand anything, before we can understand something. So, knowledge is of many branches, and all the branches have to be supplemented. As a student of spiritual science, you are expected to be a student having a principle of inclusion and not exclusion. So, we have to relax our orthodoxy through slow degrees. Unless we accept to do it, we can never be students of spiritual science. That's the reason why often we feel the books of the Tibetan master very, very difficult to understand. Because at every step, the 20th century mind refuses to accept something new, and it takes some time for the mind. Because of the degree of evolution of the 20th century mind, we are having a political way of understanding things. That is, we understand allopathy as something different from homeopathy, and homeopathy as something different from allopathy, just as we understand democracy different from communism, communism different from democracy, and commonwealth different from the Sud, etc. Because essentially the century is of a political nature, and the group human mind on this earth in the 20th century is bound to present only a political way of approach and understanding things. But there is the next century, and the next generation, and the next generation, the youngsters, who have no obligation to submit their mind to the political way of understanding. Because, as we see, we have already entered into the acquiring age, and the impact of the age is there on the mind of the younger generations. We cannot impose things upon the minds because it is an ever-expanding age, and the student is bound to have a greater maturity of mind and understanding than what we have. Our wise duty is to provide the best of what we can to the next generation. So, let us approach the subject from that point of view, like a supplementation. The medical student of the 21st century, about the middle of the century, is starts to understand that this is one chapter in the medical science, whereas this is another chapter of the same science, because the political way of understanding will go away. And there is a third chapter, which we can call diet science. call it dietetics or whatever you know. That is, understanding the relationship between your food and drink and your constitution. How the body reacts to the food, and how the individual constitution reacts to the food. So, tuning the constitution with the required food and drink and the timings of diet, the qualitative and the quantitative dietetics. This is another branch of science which should be supplemented. You can call it nature cure, which is now considered as a different science, naturopathy. So, make experiments with non-medicinal substances and see how the constitution reacts to those substances and make a supplementation of that science. And then use sunlight, use water, and make a cure. You will find miracles. But every branch shows miracles in a particular purview of the subject. There are limitations to each branch, and beyond the limitations, you will fail if you apply any one of these branches, because no one of these branches is an independent science. If you apply homeopathy where you have to apply surgery, you will fail. For example, a decayed tooth cannot be healed by mantram or meditation or spiritual healing. It is something physical, and we have to make a physical removal. It requires a mechanical approach. No use of doing something witchcraft or something like that. So, next aspect, use a magnet. Wonderful cures, but only certain diseases, not all. For example, if a fellow is suffering from bone abscess, no use of magnet. If you apply south pole or north pole or both, or bring in a third pole also, no use at all. But there are certain diseases that are not vulnerable to either medicine or surgery. They are only curable by magnet. You can never cure in any way except by using magnets. For example, certain types of mental depression, unaccountable mental depression. Ask the fellow to have a pair of magnets in his pocket for 1 week. You need not do anything at all, unless you want to make a trade of it. Just ask the fellow to have 2 little magnets properly arranged in his pocket. And after 1 week, ask him how it is. He says, splendid. That's it. And then, what you call spiritual healing. Today's subject. It's not a miracle. I think many of you have gone through the wonderful book Isis Unveiled, written by Madame Blavatsky. He has given the 10 precepts of a spiritual student. The first precept is there is no miracle. The so-called miracle is what we have not yet understood. Science not yet understood is called miracle. Because the sum total of the science of all branches put together, discovered by the human being till today, is about 15% or 18% and not more than that. The secrets of nature are still there, waiting for the human being to go and get himself tuned and honor the law of nature and be benefited. Instead of trying to conquering nature in a beastly way, the human being is invited to make friends with nature. The attitude of conquering should go. The attitude of friendship and brotherhood should develop. Then nature reveals many more secrets. Otherwise, his own concept of conquest stands as a block on the way, and he has to wait for a long time until he is pleased to depart from the beastly concept of conquering. So here is a block. We have to wait sometimes for centuries. Nature knows when to reveal, and Blavatsky says, what we call miracle is science not yet understood. In my childhood, there were people, religious bards, who used to go around singing the glory of the name of God. They used to bring miraculous dogs, one the Lord and the other his lady. They bring together, the two dogs come together, and then the dog of God and the dog of devil, they brought together, they go away. That is, the north pole of a magnet and the south pole of a magnet. On this, the picture of God is placed, and on the south pole of another magnet, the picture of the Lady of God is placed. They are brought together, they come together. And then, on the north pole of the same magnet, the devil or the giant was placed and brought to God. They go away because they are like poles. So in our childhood, we used to believe that God and his queen come together. It's a miracle. Whereas God and devil go away from each other. That's another miracle. But for the first time, the science teacher in the school taught us that it is all magnetism and nothing else. Then we were free from the illusion and we could understand the truth of it until 30 years more. Then another professor asked me, what do you mean by magnetism? Why should magnets have their like poles repelled and unlike poles attracted? That is what is called God. So once again, to the same belief from which we have reverted. For 30 years we were prodigal sons. Went away from the North Pole of God to the North Pole of ourselves, that is ego. So again, it took 30 years to find another person who asked us question. We used to boast, it's not God, it is magnet, North Pole and South Pole. He said, why should magnet behave like that? Then there was a second awakening into another fundamental truth. I think you know a book by Leo Tolstoy, these reminiscences. The first chapter he said, how I believed. In the second chapter he said, how I disbelieved. In the third chapter he said, how I again believed. This is what is required. That's why the name of Leo Tolstoy has been removed from the list of the progressive writers. When people did not know that he has written his book Reminiscences, they were pleased to keep his name in the top list of the progressive writers. Because he never spoke, he seldom spoke of God. But the moment this book was published, his Reminiscences, silently his name was removed. And spiritual healing is also not a miracle, but it is something which occurs through man and not by man. This is the fundamental truth of spiritual healing. We have to know certain basic principles and fundamental postulates before we can make a healing. Because in the modern age, there is suddenly a great exuberance towards healing. We find tens, hundreds, thousands of people coming forth to heal. They are very anxious to heal. Why? It's not pride, it's not confusion, but it is the nature of the age. We have entered into an age where service is the keynote. Yesterday we have seen what service means. Service was a great virtue in the Persian age. Service was the motive of aggrandizement in the Aryan age. And in the Aquarian age, service becomes natural. It's an instinct. That's the reason why we find many healers. Don't brush them aside. There is something there hidden. Why should they feel the instinct of healing? Why can't they feel some other thing? There is a greater truth. Just as the spring season has its own fauna and flora to be presented to earth, every season has its own fauna and flora. And the Aquarian season, which we call Aquarian age, has its own fauna and flora and its own characteristics to be presented to the biological kingdom, a part of which is the human being. So, when people come to and say in tens and thousands, we try to heal, we are healing, we are making healing. Don't heckle them, don't criticize them. There is something that is making them feel like that. They want to do something good. They want to help suffering humanity. They want to go to countries that are poor and backward and try to do something there. They feel that they are required. They are true. If you go into the Persian age, even though you have great propaganda